Montana Territory, 1881. The sky was bruised purple above the canyons, and the wind carried the kind of silence that follows after something breaks. Catherine Zeller stood at the edge of the burned-out homestead, boots sunk in ash, her dress torn at the hem. Her hands were scraped raw from digging through what little remained charred wood, a cracked porcelain cup, the steel frame of her late husband's rifle. The fire had taken everything. The land, the cabin, her name, and worse, her children. She had screamed herself hoarse the night the raiders came. They were not from any tribe she recognized, just men with torches and greed. They took her two daughters, Hattie and Hope, and left her for dead in the field with a cracked skull and a bleeding mouth. The town folks in Livingston said she would not be right again. That no man would want a ruined woman with scars on her face and ghosts in her eyes. They said she'd never be loved again, someone muttered behind her back at the mercantile, another nodded with pity. Poor Catherine, no one wants a broken thing, but Catherine did not break. She stitched herself back together with spit and fury. She was 24 and stubborn. She had buried a husband, birthed two girls, and survived a fire that should have killed her. She was not going to sit in town waiting for someone else to tell her what could not be done. She was going to find her daughters. The hard part came next: travel. Her horse had been taken and she had no money. She stood at the edge of the dry road, thumb out, eyes sharp. Most wagons passed her by. Until a rider came down the trail, slow and straight-backed on a paint horse, reins loose in one hand, rifle across his saddle. He was tall, lean, and sun-browned. His hat was pulled low, but not enough to hide the scar down his left cheek or the square set of his jaw. He slowed when he saw her. "You look like you got dragged through hell," he said. She looked up. "I did, still walking." He looked past her, saw the ruin behind her, then looked back down. "You need a ride." "I need a man who knows how to track." She lifted her chin. "And shoot." He studied her. "You running from something?" "No," she said. "I'm running toward it." He dismounted. "Name's Merritt Holloway, cowboy, scout, sometimes bounty hunter." "I'm Catherine Zeller. My daughters were taken 6 days ago by men I do not know. I want them back." He tipped his hat. "Then we ride." They did not talk much that first day. The trail demanded attention: dry creek beds, mule deer prints, boot tracks that led west. Merritt rode ahead, rifle in hand, eyes always moving. Catherine followed close behind on the horse he had brought for her from his pack line. She did not ask why he had an extra. He did not offer. The second night they camped near a cottonwood grove. Catherine sat by the fire, watching the flames bend. Her cheek ached where the burn scars stopped just below her eye. Merritt handed her a tin plate of beans without a word and sat down across from her. "You do not flinch," she said. "Why would I? Most men look at my face and see the ruin." He met her eyes. "I see a mother riding into danger for her girls. That ain't ruin, that's grit." She blinked once, then looked away. They slept under the stars. She stayed awake long after his breathing slowed. That night, for the first time in 6 days, she did not cry. By the 4th day, they found signs: boot prints too small for grown men, a ribbon snagged on a branch, a half-eaten apple tossed beside a fire pit. Hattie's ribbon. Catherine pressed it to her chest and nearly collapsed. Merritt caught her elbow, steadying her. "They are close," he said. "They are scared," she whispered. He nodded. "We will bring them home." By dusk, they spotted smoke curling up from a canyon below. Merritt pulled out a spyglass, studied the camp. 4 men, 1 wagon. I see 2 little ones tied near it. Catherine's breath caught. "Do not panic," he said. "We do this smart." She looked at him, voice shaking. "You do not have to do this, Merritt." He leaned in close, voice low and steady. "They said you would never be loved again. Then watch me love you daily starting now." She stared at him, stunned. The words were not said like a line. They were a promise. He stood, rifle in hand. "Stay here. If I do not come back in 15 minutes, take the horse and run east." But she reached out, grabbed his wrist. "We do this together." His eyes softened. "All right, Catherine Zeller. We do it together." They crept into the canyon as the sun dipped behind the ridgeline. Merritt moved silent as a ghost, Catherine beside him with a pistol gripped tight. He took out the first man with the butt of his rifle. The second turned, but Catherine was already behind him. She fired once, and he dropped. The third tried to run. Merritt tackled him, driving his fist into the man's throat. The fourth had a knife to Hattie's neck when Catherine stepped into the firelight, gun raised. "You let her go," she said. He laughed. "What are you gonna do, pretty face?" Merritt's voice cut through the trees. "She ain't gonna do nothing, I will." The man turned and Merritt shot him dead. It was over in seconds. Catherine ran to the girls. Hattie threw her arms around her mother, sobbing. Hope clung to her waist. "You came," Hattie cried. "Always," Catherine whispered, kissing their hair. "Always." Merritt stood back, watching. When Catherine looked up, her eyes found his later as the fire crackled safe and warm and her daughters curled close beside her. Catherine reached for Merritt's hand. "You meant it," she said. He nodded. "Every word." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then let me love you back, daily." He smiled, just a little. "Deal?" By the time they reached the edge of Bozeman, the snowmelt had begun to pool in the gullies, and the cottonwoods along the river had started to bud. Merritt kept the pace easy for the girls' sake, leading the pack mule with Hope tucked in front of him, her small hands wound tight into his coat. Hattie rode with Catherine, both of them quiet but alert, eyes flicking to every movement along the road. They stayed off the main trail, skirting the ridgelines and keeping to the tree cover. Merritt didn't say much, but his gaze moved constantly over the rise of the hills, the flight path of birds, the shift of wind. He'd been watching the ground too, and what he hadn't told Catherine yet was that the men who took her daughters hadn't been acting alone. At a shallow creek crossing, he finally spoke. "There's another set of tracks joined in on the third day. Horse-shod, light step. Someone was following them before we were." Catherine passed a waterskin to Hattie, then looked over. "You think they were meeting someone? Could be the man was watching for his own reasons, but he's not far. I don't like unknowns." She brushed a damp curl behind her ear. "You think he'll follow us?" Merritt glanced at the sun. "Maybe. Depends what he wants." They made camp early that night on the lee side of a ridge where the wind couldn't reach. Merritt built the fire lower than usual and set their bedrolls in a tight circle, the girls between him and Catherine. He whittled a sliver of pine, shaping it into something for Hope to hold when she stirred in her sleep. Catherine watched his hands, the care he took with the blade. She waited until the girls were asleep before she spoke again. "You ever have a family, Merritt?" He kept his eyes on the wood. "Not the kind that stays." Her voice was soft. "Why not?" He set the knife down. "I was born in Texas. Father drank. Mother didn't make it through the fever. I left at 15. Rode fence, drove cattle, took whatever paid. You keep moving long enough, you start thinking maybe that's the only way to live." Catherine folded her hands. "But you stopped." He looked at her then. "I saw you standing in that ash and didn't want to keep riding." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The next morning brought trouble. They were breaking camp when Merritt's horse snorted hard, ears pinned. He drew his rifle in a single motion, stepping between the girls and the trees. A man emerged slowly from the underbrush, hands raised, a battered hat in one of them. "Name's Elias Grant," he said, voice hoarse from dust. "I've been tracking those men same as you." Merritt didn't lower the rifle. "Why?" Elias nodded toward Catherine. "Because they took something of mine too, a woman, young, half Shoshone, name's Lita. They were moving east when I lost them." Catherine stepped forward. "They're dead." "All four?" Elias's shoulders slumped. "You find her?" She shook her head. He nodded once, slow. "I figured as much when I saw the buzzards circling. Still needed to ask." Merritt gave him a long look. "You're alone?" "I got a horse tethered down the hill." "Nothing else?" Catherine watched the way Merritt studied the man. The air felt close, like a door not quite shut. Finally, Merritt lowered the rifle. "We're heading into Bozeman. You're welcome to ride partway." Elias looked surprised. "That kind of trust comes easy." "It doesn't," Merritt said. "But the girls are watching." Elias nodded and fell in beside them. By late afternoon, they reached a bend in the road where the river ran wide and slow. Merritt led them across a natural ford, water up to the horse's knees. On the far bank, Catherine pulled her shawl tighter. "I'll need work," she said, not to anyone in particular. "There's a boarding house in Bozeman run by a widow named Mrs. Calder," Merritt said. "She doesn't ask questions and she keeps a clean place. Might need help cooking." Catherine looked at the girls. "They'll need school." "They'll have it," he answered. Elias cleared his throat. I'll head south once I get supplies, no cause to linger, Merritt nodded. Safe travels. As Elias rode ahead, the girls quieted again. Hattie leaned against Catherine's side, her voice low. Will we stay long? Catherine looked to Merritt before answering. Long enough to make something new. They reached the edge of town by supper. The streets were muddy, and the air smelled of horses and coal smoke. Merritt helped the girls down and tied the reins outside the boarding house gate. Mrs. Calder opened the door before they knocked. She looked them all over in one glance. You'll be needing a room and food. Catherine met her gaze. And work, Mrs. Calder nodded. Come in, then. That night, after the girls had been bathed and tucked into real beds with quilts, Catherine stepped out onto the porch. Merritt stood at the rail, watching the street. She joined him, arms folded. What happens now? He didn't look at her. That depends on you. I've got work. A roof. My girls are safe. He finally turned toward her. And me, she reached up, brushing a fleck of dust from his coat. You stay. He didn't ask for more, didn't press. But when she leaned up and kissed the corner of his mouth, he closed his eyes like it was the first quiet he'd known in years. And in that breath between evening and night, Catherine Zeller chose him. Not because she needed saving, but because she'd seen the way he carried her girls. Because he'd stood between her and danger without asking what she had to offer in return. Because love, when it's real, doesn't wait for permission. It just stays. The spring rains came late that year, but when they did, they turned the road into a ribbon of rutted clay, the kind that clung to boots and wheels alike. Merritt stood behind the boarding house, hammering a new latch onto the chicken pen Mrs. Calder kept while Catherine worked inside, sleeves rolled to her elbows, skin dusted with flour. Hattie and Hope had been enrolled at the schoolhouse on the east side of town, and each morning they walked there with their satchels swinging, Catherine brushing their hair smooth before they left. Merritt had started fixing things around the boarding house without being asked. A broken stair rail, a sagging hinge, a stubborn stovepipe he worked in quiet stretches. Sleeves rolled, his hat low. One evening, Catherine found him sharpening a drawknife out back. The light had thinned to gold and the air smelled of wet wood and warming earth. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching the blade move against the whetstone. You always need a task in your hands, she asked. He looked up, pushed his hat back. Idle hands make me restless, she stepped closer. Mrs. Calder says you patched her roof without charge. I sleep under it some nights, he said. Feels fair. She knelt beside the workbench, resting her chin on her hand. You never ask for anything, he shrugged. I don't need much, she studied him. That's not the same as wanting. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, I want peace, but I'm still figuring what that looks like. Catherine reached for the drawknife, ran her fingers along the handle. Mine looks like a place where the girls can laugh without glancing over their shoulder. You've given them that. Not alone, she said. Merritt nodded once, then turned back to the blade. Later that week, a letter arrived from Wyoming Territory, addressed in an unfamiliar hand. Mrs. Calder handed it to Catherine at breakfast, and she opened it slowly, reading once before folding it again. Merritt noticed the shift in her shoulders before she spoke. My sister passed 2 winters ago, she said. I didn't know. Her husband's remarried and doesn't want the girls visiting. She didn't cry, just set the letter down beside her plate and reached for her coffee. Merritt waited, then said, You still have people here. Catherine met his eyes. I know. That's why it didn't undo me. That night, he found her on the porch, sewing a patch onto Hope's skirt. The lantern beside her gave off a soft glow, and her hands moved with quiet steadiness. I've been thinking, he said, stepping closer. She looked up. About what? He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. There's a deed, bit of land west of town, small cabin, needs work. She set the needle down. Yours could be ours, he said. She stared at him, the breeze lifting strands of hair from her shoulder. I wasn't looking for this, she said. When I stood in those ashes, I thought I'd never be safe again. You are now, because of you, he shook his head. Because of you, you got back up, you rode into danger, you never stopped loving them. She rose slowly, moving toward him. And you never once asked what you'd get in return. He looked down at her hands. I didn't need to, I knew. She reached for the paper, resting her fingers over his. I'd like to see that land, she said. You will. He leaned down but didn't kiss her, just rested his forehead against hers. I meant what I said, he whispered. Every day, no matter what comes. Catherine's eyes closed. Then watch me love you back every day. From inside the house, Hope's voice called out, half asleep and needing her mother. Catherine touched Merritt's chest once, then turned to go. He watched her go inside, then looked toward the horizon, where the clouds had broken just enough to let the moon through. He'd ridden farther than most, lost more than he'd ever said aloud. But here on this porch, in this town, with a woman who had once stood in ruin and now stood in grace, he had found the place where he could finally stay. And the next morning, when Catherine took his hand without a word and led him to the girls before breakfast, no one had to say a thing. They were a family, quietly, completely. And for good, by early June, the land Merritt had claimed west of town had begun to take shape into something more than a cabin. It stood at the edge of a meadow rimmed with lodgepole pine and young aspen, the grass high enough to hide the girls when they played. The roof had been repaired with fresh shakes, and Catherine had strung white linens across a clothesline Merritt had rigged between two posts. The scent of soaproot and sun-dried cotton hung in the air. Catherine had moved them in slowly, one wagon load at a time. She insisted on bringing only what they needed: quilts, the girls' schoolbooks, a battered cookpot that had survived the fire. She left behind everything that carried weight without worth. One afternoon, as Merritt returned from trading timber at the mill, he found her barefoot in the garden patch near the porch, hands sunk into the soil. Hope sat nearby on an overturned crate, peeling bark from a willow branch while Hattie practiced stringing buttons on a length of twine. You're planting late, Merritt said, leaning against the fence he'd built the week before. Catherine dusted her palms on her skirt. I know. But the ground's warm and I've seen squash take in worse conditions. You planning to sell at market? She stood, brushing grit from her knees. I'm not planting for profit, I'm planting for roots. He crossed the yard toward her, boots soft in the grass. You've put down more than one kind of root here, she smiled, but it was quiet. I've never stayed in one place by choice before. You staying now? She looked past him to the hills, where the clouds were beginning to gather low and thick. I think I already did. That night, a storm rolled in from the east, sudden and hard. Merritt had secured the shutters before dusk, and Catherine had boiled beans and cornbread over the stove while the girls braided each other's hair in front of the fire. When the wind picked up, rattling the eaves, Hope climbed into Merritt's lap without a word. He held her steady, one arm around her back, watching the flames throw shadows across the floor. Catherine lit a second lamp, set it beside the window. You always this calm in a storm. I don't mind storms, Merritt said. They pass. Hattie looked up from her corner. You ever see one tear a roof off? Merritt nodded. Once, on a cattle drive through Kansas, lost half the herd to flooding. Hope's fingers curled into his coat. Did anyone get hurt? One man broke his leg, but the rest of us pulled through. Catherine leaned against the doorframe, the lamplight warming her features. You always pull through. I try. He looked at her. You do too. When the rain came, it was heavy and clean, drumming against the roof in a rhythm that quieted the girls to sleep. Merritt carried Hope to her cot and eased her down, then checked the window latches once more before returning to the hearth. Catherine was still there, arms wrapped around herself, watching the fire. She didn't look at him when she spoke. You don't ask much of me? I don't need to. I was married before, you know that. He nodded once. You loved him? I did, but it wasn't simple. He was kind, but he was tired. Always tired, the war changed him. Merritt sat on the floor beside her. You don't owe me anything, Catherine. She turned her head then, eyes searching his face. I know, that's why I want to give you something. He didn't speak, just waited. She reached into the basket beside her and pulled out a folded square of muslin. Inside was a single, carefully stitched shirt, simple but made with care. She laid it in his lap. I didn't know if you'd want it, she said. He ran his hand over the fabric, thumb catching along a seam. I'll wear it tomorrow. She leaned into him then, just enough that her shoulder pressed against his. I'm learning how to live in safety. It's strange. It'll get less strange. Will you stay? His voice was low. I already did. When the fire burned down to coals, they didn't move. They sat there, shoulder to shoulder, the storm fading into a hush outside. Catherine's hand found his, and they sat in silence, not out of fear or grief, but because peace had finally earned its place between them. And when dawn broke, mist rising from the grass and birds starting low in the trees, Catherine stepped out onto the porch barefoot, Merritt behind her, his hand warm at her back. The land before them was theirs now, not just because they'd built on it, but because they'd bled for it, healed on it, chosen it. She turned to him, eyes steady. "I want more days like this." He touched her cheek, the one still lined faintly with the scar. "Then watch me give them to you." Daily, and she believed him. With everything she had left by midsummer, the days turned long and slow, with heat pressing down from a high Montana sky. The planted rose in Catherine's garden had taken hold, squash vines curling thick around the trellis Merritt had built from stripped pine, beans climbing high enough for the girls to race their growth by inches. The cabin had settled deep into the land by then, as if it had always belonged there. Catherine had taken on mending work for a seamstress in town, and Merritt had started helping a nearby rancher with branding. They kept a rhythm between them, not spoken but lived her mornings with the girls, his before dawn with the stock, and evenings always together at the long table Merritt had built by hand from a felled spruce. One night after supper, Catherine brought out a jar of blackberry preserves she'd traded for. She passed it to Merritt, watching the way his fingers turned the lid with care. "I've been thinking about the land behind the house," she said. The slope near the cedar grove. He scooped out a spoonful, offered it to her before taking his own. "What about it?" "I want to clear a patch for flowers next spring, not for market, just for color." He looked at her over the rim of the jar. "You always plan ahead like that." "Not always," she said. "But lately it feels like there's time to." He set the jar down and wiped his fingers on a cloth. "I'll help you dig it." "There's no rush, I want to." She met his eyes. "You're not restless?" "Not anymore." She leaned closer, voice low. "I used to think I wouldn't feel whole again. Not really. I thought what happened would always be the first thing people saw." Merritt didn't reach for her hand. He didn't need to. "You're not what happened to you." "I know that now, but it took me a while to believe it." "You believe it now?" "I do." That night, when the girls were asleep, they walked the edge of the pasture, fireflies rising from the tall grass. Catherine reached for Merritt's hand without hesitation, her fingers lacing through his. They didn't speak, but the silence between them had changed. It held no fear, no waiting, only steadiness. Weeks passed, and the cabin grew fuller in small ways. A curtain stitched by Catherine's hand hung in the kitchen window. A carved whistle Merritt made for Hope sat on the mantel, Hattie's drawings tacked to the wall with scraps of cloth. On Sundays, Catherine and the girls walked to the chapel outside town. Merritt waited for them at the gate afterward, always with a canteen and a quiet nod. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the air turned soft with the scent of clover, Catherine called Merritt in from the yard. "I need your help with something," she said. He stepped inside, brushing dust from his sleeves. "What is it?" She held out a folded slip of linen. Inside was a ring, simple silver, no stone, slightly worn. "It was my mother's," she said. "I found it tucked in the hem of an old apron." I'd forgotten it still existed. Merritt looked at her, waiting. She held it out to him. "I want to wear it, but not as a memory." He took it from her fingers. "You sure?" "I've been sure for a while." He didn't ask her to repeat it, didn't make a speech. He stepped to her, slid the ring onto her hand, and kissed her palm once, there in the quiet of their home. They married under the cedar grove 2 days later, just the four of them, with a neighbor's wife reading a psalm and the girls weaving wildflowers into Catherine's hair. Merritt wore his cleanest shirt and stood without shifting once, his hands steady, his voice clear when he said her name. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep on a pallet of quilts beneath the stars, Merritt and Catherine sat on the porch, legs touching, the lantern between them flickering low. "You thinking ahead again?" he asked. She nodded. "I want a milk cow, maybe 2. And a loom if I can find one that isn't too dear." He reached for her hand. "We'll manage it." "I know." He leaned back, watching the sky. "You ever wonder why things happened the way they did?" "I did, but I don't anymore. Why not? Because they brought me here. To you. They sat there until the lantern burned out, the night warm around them. Years passed. The girls grew tall and bright, their laughter shaping the air around the cabin like wind through wheat. Hope took to animals, always the first to rise, always barefoot. Hattie read everything she could find, her thoughts deeper than her years. They called Merritt Pa without ceremony one morning at breakfast, and he didn't speak for a long time afterward, just reached for Catherine's hand beneath the table and held it. The pasture grew lusher each spring, the flower patch behind the house blooming in bursts of purple and gold. Catherine's loom arrived by wagon one summer, and by the next, she had woven enough to trade for a second cow. They never lived grandly, but they lived full. And in the quiet hours when the barn door creaked open at dawn or the girls sang low, while shelling peas, Catherine would glance across the room and find Merritt watching her the way he had that first night by the fire, not seeing ruin, not even seeing courage. Just her. And that, for both of them, was everything.